Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Send us to the chat if you can hear and see me, and we will start. Okay, then let's move on. My name is Alexey Mikhailov. I'm Business Development Manager for Security Solutions in Terralink, and today I will moderate this webinar. And first of all, I would like to notice webinar rules for attendees. All attendees video will be automatically turned off and audio muted. If you have any questions, please submit to Q&A box. Provide us with your name, last name, before you submit your question. It will help me to organize Q&A session after presentation. If you have a private question, you can reach out to the speakers directly. The contact details currently available on your screens and copied to the chat box. Today's webinar will be also recorded and available on CERBA YouTube channel. All the materials will be also provided after our webinar. If there are any other questions or concerns, you can reach out our CERBA Moscow and Toronto chapter regional directors. In the first part of our webinar, let me introduce Alexander Novichikhin, General Manager Kaspersky Canada. He will share us information about cyber threats and how to protect from them. Alexander, I will pass the word to you.
Thank you, Alexey, for the introduction, and I hope everyone can see me and my screen too while I'm fumbling a bit here with the controls. Give me just a second. Okay. Can you confirm that you can hear me well and see the presentation? Maybe in the chat box.
Yeah, everything looks fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, once again, Alexey, thanks for the introduction and thank you all for joining us on this webinar this morning, and greetings from Moscow. So in my part, I'll cover today the cyber risks of working from home and some of the COVID-related threats and attack vectors that we are seeing in the world right now, and also some of the best practices on how you can be protected against those. For those who might not be familiar with our company, Kaspersky is actually one of the largest cybersecurity, privately owned cybersecurity companies in the world right now. We've been established more than 22 years ago. Right now we have more than 4,000 employees. Our software is protecting more than 400 million users worldwide. We've got more than 270 corporate customers, and we operate in more than 200 countries. And also, obviously, we're closely working with law enforcement organizations across the world, like Interpol and Europol. So briefly on the agenda, as I said, I'll give a brief update on the current working from home situation, the elevated cybersecurity risks for employees working from home, and how the threat actors are sort of evolving their threat tactics in accordance with the current changing landscape, and also some of the tips and industry best practices on how to be protected from those threats. I guess in terms of the current situation with working from home, everyone is kind of feeling it on themselves. Compared to the pre-COVID world, where only probably up to 40% of organizations would allow their employees to work from locations outside the office, including people being on business trips, etc. In the current environment, all the organizations allowing their employees to work from home. And what this leads to is one of the things is obviously the increased use of personal devices for work-related activities. In some cases, it's simply due to the fact that an employee in the office will be working from that desktop PC there, and during lockdown, they either weren't able to sort of relocate that desktop back to their home, or maybe the organization just wasn't physically able to purchase a laptop for them. So they ended up kind of working remotely from their personal PC or laptop. And while working from home definitely has its own benefits, hopefully it's increased productivity rates, although again, like in the current environment with kids running around the house, it might be different for everyone, but generally, yeah, it's improved retention rates. It's like lots of employees right now view it as a very important part of the compensation package, being able to work from home 1 or 2 days per week, definitely. But as I mentioned, it obviously brings some elevated cybersecurity risks for the companies. And I guess one of the challenges also is that no one really has any clue on when it's going to end. And obviously, if we look at some of the larger companies like Facebook and Google, they have extended this working from home regime till year end. And just yesterday, I saw a tweet from the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, who said that they would kind of allow this work from home to last permanently for their employees. If they don't feel like returning to work from the office, they can continue working from home. Just two numbers that I wanted to highlight on this slide is the potential cost of a cyber breach or a cyber incident that can happen within an organization. Obviously, it's dependent on the organization size, so it's definitely small for small and medium-sized businesses and larger for large enterprises. But an average check related to restoring the IT infrastructure, dealing with any consequences of those breaches, like potential litigation, fighting the, like restoring the PCs and servers after ransomware encryption attack, like decrypting those, can be anywhere from around $100,000 for small organizations and like as much as $1 million for large enterprises. And the reasons for the cyber breach can definitely be numerous, but obviously we see more and more of those happening due to employees falling victims to phishing attacks, disgruntled employees stealing sensitive customer or partner data. And very often in those cases, indeed, like the sort of the weakest link in the chain is the company's employees that unfortunately allow those breaches or cyber incidents to happen. So talking about the cybersecurity risks of working remotely, obviously, we'd kind of split it into 3 buckets or 3 swim lanes. The network portion of it is pretty simple. Obviously, whenever you would be working from your office, you would usually be doing it, you would be protected on the perimeter by corporate-grade firewalls, corporate-grade gateways that on top of that would probably be running some sort of anti-malware software just to make sure that, nothing passes that perimeter. And when the employees find themselves working from home, of course, their network might be compromised in one way or another because of usage of routers, which might be running outdated firmware. They might be running too simple passwords on their Wi-Fi, which can easily fall victim to like brute force password attacks. And all in all, this can lead to like increased surface of attacks. And whereas previously, like the problems of your employees' home network were just limited to the home network, nowadays when they're either working from their corporate device in their home network, or maybe they're working from their personal PC and accessing their corporate network via VPN or in some other way, a breach in their home network can actually lead to a potential breach for the corporate organizational network too, and a threat actor can sort of use that home network breach as sort of a stepping stone to launch a wider attack on the organization too. When we talk about the devices piece, of course, in an ideal scenario, you would have the employees working with corporate devices, and the fact that they would work from a corporate device would mean at least that it's got all the corporate security policies enforced on it. That means that there would be timely operating system updates, web browser updates, any other application updates, in a situation where your employee would be working from a home PC, unfortunately, the IT department doesn't have that much visibility on what operating system they're running, whether it's updated or not. And same goes for any other applications that might be installed. And last but not least, of course, the fact that they might not have any anti-malware software installed on their home PC can also lead to potential breaches. One other thing, obviously, even if the person is working with their corporate device, some things like rolling out updates can also lead to some problems. For example, many companies use a centralized server that's installed on premises to roll out those updates, and on Tuesday or Wednesday patch days, when, for example, Microsoft rolls out their Windows and Office updates, your corporate network might get clogged, like with all the users trying to download those updates to their homes via the home network, and in turn the home network can also be bottlenecked with their laptop trying to get in gigabytes of updates. So this relatively simple operation that would take you 15 minutes when you're in the office can take a whole day while you're working from home and trying to get all those updates via a VPN. And last but not least, definitely it's the mobile device tracking. Ideally you'd need some sort of mobile device management solution to make sure that all the mobile devices that are being used by the users also have the most recent software, so that you don't end up with a zoo of different operating systems, different flavors of Android operating systems, some of which might be outdated, and also that you're able to enroll and enforce security policies like screen lock protection, for example, across all those mobile devices. And obviously, the users, as I said, sometimes they're the weakest link in the security chain, with more spare time on their hands. At least in theory, right? Like they don't spend time on commute, but yeah, they still might require more time to manage their kids running around the house. So in those cases where they do have more spare time, they might spend more time shopping online, accessing social networks, and maybe doing some other, non-work related tasks on their either work PCs or on their home computers. And if they're using home computer to perform work-related tasks, obviously, again, we have that risk of other family members accessing it. And whereas your employee might be properly trained on all the cybersecurity-related risks, you might have them enrolled in a security awareness program. Very often other household members, are not that sophisticated in terms of being able to properly detect a phishing email. So this definitely provides additional risks too. Switching gears a bit, to what we currently see out there in terms of the threats. Definitely the threat actors are very flexible, and as soon as the pandemic hit us, we've seen immediate increase in the number of sort of fake domains related, registration of fake domains related to COVID, and more phishing letters and attempts that are somehow directly or indirectly linked to COVID. Here you can see an example of one such letter that's obviously coming from a very convincingly looking, but nevertheless fake address, and like from a very real organization, that's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in United States. Obviously, what all the threat actors are also very good at, and what is very often also sort of a red flag and indicator that the email you're looking at is a phishing one, is they create that sense of urgency for you to either click on the link immediately or as soon as possible, or like open the attachment also as soon as possible. And they're doing it either with, you know, we've seen like fake promises of vaccine from WHO, and it would only be limited to a certain number of first comers. So that way, you know, especially if like you have someone, a relative or a friend affected, you'd have like a knee-jerk reaction to just click on the link. Obviously, you are advised to remain skeptical throughout these difficult times, and you know, not try and click anything. Better be safe than sorry in this case, as in other cases too. And for this particular one, also like the link that you are being led to is different to what is shown in the email itself. Depending on your email client, you might need either to hover over that link with a cursor, and it would show you that in reality the link would lead you to the CDC gov.org site, which is different from what you are being shown in the email. So that's one more red flag to be able to tell those phishing emails. Or you might right click it and copy and paste address in the browser and compare the addresses, and again this would obviously be a red flag to classify it as a phishing email. But if you do click on it, it would lead you to a also very convincingly looking, but obviously a fake Outlook page, and the end goal of the threat actor in this case is just to steal your Outlook credentials and get access to your email. But hopefully, if you've got some sort of anti-malware software installed, like me, you know, when I would try to click similar link on my work laptop and home laptop too, I would just get access blocked to that website. I'm pretty sure that majority of software out there would be able to do. This is another example, also pretty similar, but maybe a bit more naive in a sense that it's asking you for a donation, also coming from a fake CDC domain, and hopefully it doesn't inflict that much damage out there, because you know, I would assume that majority of users who might fall for it hopefully would not be able sophisticated enough to either own or be able to donate the Bitcoin to the address provided. So again, like rule of thumbs here, if you're in doubt, try to Google, then you'll find out that yes, CDC definitely is not asking for donations, and yeah, that wouldn't accept Bitcoin in any case. And here is the last example. It's, I mean, the last time showing, obviously, definitely much more in the wild. It's an example actually of a Trojan app that hopefully is not available on the official app stores. Like you wouldn't be able to download from the Google store. So that's one more sort of advice and rule of thumb is never to download apps from non-official sources. But if you do download it, it like shows you some false information about the infected people around your location, and is asking for a relatively small charge to be able to show your location of those people. And if you fall for it and provide your credit card details on the next page, it doesn't even charge you anything, because why would it? The threat actor in this case would like theoretically have access to all your debit or credit card balance. So yeah, hopefully, again, we don't see much people falling for it, and like this specific app is mostly limited to Spanish-speaking countries. So some of the best practices and advice on making sure that your remote workers are secure. Again, it's pretty simple. There are no probably revelations here, no silver bullets, but in my opinion, I always tend to compare it to like advice on healthy living. Don't drink excessively, don't smoke, eat healthy, exercise regularly. All sounds simple, but yeah, not that many people are able to follow it. And I think it's pretty similar with like all the security advice. So, just making sure that you have your home Wi-Fi as secure as possible. That means depending on your router model, most probably you do have a firewall there, just making sure that it's turned on, making sure that you are using complex passwords to give access to connect to the Wi-Fi. You don't provide access, or you don't provide that passwords to your neighbors. That's preferential, because end of the day you would never know what sort of devices are connected there. Again, end of the day, you might also have like some smart home devices that also might be providing, might be running outdated firmware, and might be used as sort of a stepping stone for further attacks on your home network. So update the router firmware, turn on firewalls on the router and your PC too. And then if we look at devices, as I mentioned already, the main sort of a no-brainer advice is make sure that you've got some sort of anti-malware software running, and like hopefully if it's your corporate device, you already have it. But then if you are forced, or if you have to work from your home device, also it's a very good idea to make sure that you have some sort of that software installed. And as I mentioned, again, like in the situation of you working on your corporate lab PC, you'd most probably have all the timely updates rolled out, but just making sure that you also have it on your home PC is definitely a good rule of thumb. Encryption of laptops is probably more advice for the times when we used to travel a bit more, but yeah, definitely something that majority of organizations implement. And some real-world examples that I've seen, in majority of cases, it's some variation of BitLocker software, but I've seen organizations rolling it out and then not giving the users the ability to change their passwords. So they would end up with complex passwords that are hard to memorize. And I've literally seen users, with yellow sticky notes on their laptops that will be complaining that it's too hard to remember, and obviously invalidating the whole idea of encryption end of the day. And then backups, not just simply having the backups, but making sure you have some of the backups stored in cold storage or somewhere where they would not be accessible from inside your network. Because again, in real world, we've seen attacks like ransomware attacks where everything would get encrypted, including your backups if they're accessible from your network. And in that case, you don't have a backup to restore your servers and everything else from. So make sure that you do have those cold storage backups somewhere. And then users, like if you do have some sort of learning curriculum for users, it's a great idea to make sure that you incorporate the training on security awareness in one form or another for users, for your employees, and also just making sure that ideally you'd also have some imitation of phishing attacks being sent to them from time to time. I guess the question that we don't cover here is what to do with like systematic offenders. And yeah, I do get asked that question from time to time, like you would have users who just always fall for those the internal phishing emails and like definitely provide a risk to organization, but I don't have an answer for that, right? Like continue training them on weekly, monthly basis as often as possible. And also simple rules like making sure that users don't work under local admin accounts, because it would be easy to get those accounts compromised and get admin credentials. Sorry, I switched. And in terms of mobile devices, Again, similar message, just making sure that you've got some sort of mobile device management solution installed would be a very good idea, so that you can enforce your security policies like screen lock password, and for devices that have biometric identification like Touch ID or whatever version is. Android is pretty good, and also so that in cases of like theft or devices being lost, you'll be able to log the device remotely and then wipe the data from it if necessary. Last but not least, obviously, you know, we all understand that it's difficult, challenging times, and one thing that our company is offering, in addition to anti-malware software, are also different versions of security awareness training. And you know, in current environment, if you feel that this might be something that you might roll out in your organization, we are more than ready to provide you free licenses for as long as 3 months, just to make sure that you know your employees and your whole organization is staying secure through those challenging times. And you know, hopefully, since the average employee is more productive working from home, you know, they should have more than enough time to train and make sure that they don't fall for those threat actors' tricks. And with that, I think I am pretty much done and would be more than happy to answer any questions that we might have. So I'll stop sharing. And if we don't have the questions right now, we also had some questions pre-sent to us. And I guess, yeah, I'll cover those. So the questions that we got was how much better will be the competing services from Facebook, Microsoft, etc. than Zoom in protecting users' privacy and computer system? And sort of a follow-up to that, which of these competitors seem to offer the best protection and free services, value for money for commercial use? I guess, again, situation is changing extremely quickly and dynamically here. You know, like if you would have asked me 2 months ago, Zoom would definitely be a no-no. You know, we've all read all those articles on Zoom bombing, some of the stuff that they had, like attention tracking features that could potentially be viewed as a sort of a compromise in terms of privacy. But I think they've been making big strides in making sure that their app is more secure. And also, you know, again, there are like simple rules of thumbs to make sure that your video conferencing is secure, like don't post the links with embedded passwords on social media. Actually, don't share the links with the password embedded, like send the password in a separate email, make sure that your meetings are password protected. But then talking about Microsoft's product like Teams, obviously, if you do have already license subscription to O365, Teams is, as far as I understand, Microsoft licenses is relatively complex, but like Teams would be free of charge for you. And that's a bit of a no-brainer, like, you know, using Teams for internal communication, in my opinion, right now is definitely more secure. So it's just a question of the purpose of using, right? Like if you're just gonna host a Friday drinks party online, then Zoom is probably your choice because it's simple to use. You know, everyone knows how to operate it. You don't really need to install anything. But more for commercial, maybe like sensitive information calls, yeah, definitely I'd vote for Teams. Do we have more time for Q&A, or I would pass it on to Brent?
Alexander,
Alex?
I have a few questions.
Sure.
And probably I start with comment this question about collaboration tool. As I know, now all vendors propose anti-COVID solutions and ready to give licenses for free, at least for 90 days. And for example, Cisco WebEx, I think it's one of the most robust products for collaboration. They also provide licenses for free, at least for 90 days. And if you have, for example, a partner who help you with Cisco, they can help with these licenses. Well, but now I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Thank you for information. I think that this security trainings is necessary, but maybe it's a good idea to train about cybersecurity risks, not only employees, but whole families in current situation. Is it possible?
Yeah, it's a great idea. And as I mentioned, you know, like your household members accessing your work PC or like home PC when you work from it is definitely an additional source of risk. So like theoretically, if you can somehow enforce them being trained, it would be beneficial. But then just the main question is, yeah, how to make sure that they are trained, right? They're not bound. Maybe we're getting a bit into the legal woodworks here, but like they're not bound by any contractual obligations. So it's sort of a more of a goodwill here. Like, yeah, you can provide them access to the training, but probably, unfortunately, you can't enforce. You can't make sure that they pass it, right?
I see. Thank you. And my second question, maybe I start from story. Not so far. I got advertising in YouTube with some clip about service which help to find information breaches in Facebook and so on, that your personal data was leaked, and you can give compensation for this. And well, I decided to look at this clip. They started to promote some service which looks like some government service from US, and where you fill your personal data information, and they check through different database where your data was founded, and after that you can give some compensation. I decided to check this site and found that it's some sort of scammer. And I sent information to YouTube that they promote some scammer site. Unfortunately, YouTube did not react on this, and I see after 1 month the same advertising in YouTube. And that is why my question is, sometimes even people who know about risks can become a victim of social engineering. What are the 3 main points you can emphasize to check that it's a trusted source?
Yeah, I think one is, you know, just continuing to be skeptical. If something just looks too good to be true, most probably it's not true. But like in this particular case, obviously, yeah, everyone heard about like with different governments announcing different forms of aid for COVID-related situations. Yeah, it's like relatively easy to fall victim to those false advertisements. So just doing your research, just like checking that the domain is legitimate one, that it's really like whatever they're offering does really resonate with whatever the government was offering. Checking that yeah, making sure that like the links that lead you to the domain are the same that you see. Sometimes they hide it behind a button. And then again, as I said, you know, very often like it's a sense of urgency created around those emails and letters. So like, don't fall for it. Take your time to do your background research, like double checking everything. And then just to maybe feel a bit safer, as I said, just having that anti-malware software installed. Like even if you fail for it, even if you fall for it, even if you click the link, then yeah, most probably in majority of cases, you'd show that it would block access because it's a malicious site.
I see. Thank you. Maybe I also share my little secret. If I see some suspicious email and I have doubts that it is normal, maybe not, I try to use my Apple iPad for check this email with, for example, PDF attachment, because scammers usually target to Windows and Android systems, and it's quite hard to penetrate iOS or a Mac operational system.
Yeah, as long as you have an iPad for that. I'm not going to tell you a story about the richest man in the world who got hacked on his iOS, Jeff Bezos, but yeah, it's just a question of money.
I agree, yeah. Okay, Alexander, thank you for your information and for your time. Now let me introduce Brent Arnold, practicing partner in Gowling WLG Advocacy Department. He is specializing in commercial litigation, arbitration in cybersecurity. And he will give us advices about legal issues and useful resources for small and medium enterprises. Brent, I pass you what?
All right, thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm just going to take a moment to queue up my slides. All right. So as was said, I head up a technology litigation subgroup of my firm. It's a global firm. And one of the things that I do as part of that is I'm a breach coach and cybersecurity professional. So this is a subject that's very close to my heart. I have to give this brief disclaimer because I am a lawyer. What I'm providing today isn't legal advice. It's just information. If you have a particular legal situation you need help with, you should contact a lawyer. Here's what I'd like to cover in the time that we have left. What to do in the event of a cyber breach. I'm going to take you through the cycle that a breach coach walks a client through. What resources are out there for small and medium enterprises, and also some options that are available to you in terms of insurance coverage and certification options so that you can make sure that your company is safe. So here is the cycle of responding to a data breach. You stop by, as we say, stopping the bleeding. First of all, make sure that you identify and contain the breach itself, and you make the phone calls and the emails that you're required to under your breach response plan, which we'll talk about a bit more later. You reach out to your insurer if you're insured. You reach out to your breach coach if you have an assigned breach coach. And you reach out to your legal counsel because they'll help you deal with the crisis in the short term. You should also be talking to data forensics people to help you deal with containing the breach at a technical level. And you should be thinking about whether or not, depending on how big the breach is and how big your company is, whether or not you need to be thinking about rolling out a public relations strategy to control your customers' reaction to the breach and to sort of stop people from panicking. Second step is investigate, figure out exactly what the source was, preserve any evidence in case you need down the road to satisfy a privacy commissioner or a court that you had appropriate safeguards in place and that you responded appropriately. You need to figure out who's been affected by the breach. If your customers, your employees' personal data has been accessed or used in any way, you may have reporting obligations to the privacy commissioner. We'll talk about that in a moment. And you have to start to get your arms around what's your possible financial exposure as a result of the breach. Next step. Now that you've figured out who's affected by this, you have to decide whether or not there is a real risk of significant harm, and that's the legal test, posed to anybody whose data was part of the breach. If that happens, you have reporting obligations to the privacy commissioners. Last step is remediation. Look after the people who are affected by the breach, and courts and privacy commissioners expect to see this. If there's a lawsuit, then one of the things the courts are going to expect to see is how you behaved after the breach. Did you make sure your customers knew about it? Did you give them information on how to be safe? And how to, like for instance, checking their credit monitoring, notifying their banks, changing their passwords, that sort of a thing. You should probably be providing them credit monitoring and things like that to help them mitigate their losses in the event that the hacker is able to do something with their information. And you should be fixing whatever problems were in your system that allowed the breach to happen in the first place. And I should tell you, courts don't expect the response to be perfect. They don't expect that you're never going to get hacked. But what they do expect to see is that the company has reasonable measures in place, and that if a breach happens nonetheless, the company takes steps to make sure that that same mistake isn't repeated again. Next, you have to think about preparing for next time. And how do you do that? If you don't have cyber insurance, get cyber insurance. There's an open question with a lot of these policies about what they're going to cover, but judges and privacy commissioners are going to expect you to have had the coverage in place. Make sure you have a breach response plan in place. This is essentially the document and the plan that when the event of a breach happens, you know exactly what you're supposed to do, you know who's responsible for what, and you should be taking this out more than once a year and making sure it's current, because the last thing you want is to know that the first person you're supposed to call no longer works at the company or isn't at the law firm that you're using anymore, because then you lose time, and time is crucial in responding to breaches. You want to make sure that you've got policies and practices in place to ensure that you've got security and resilience, so that you can bounce back from an attack quickly. Talking about backups, talking about ways of carrying on your business while you're still dealing with cleaning up the mess that a breach causes. You want regular employee training, and you heard about that in the last presentation, to make sure that your employees understand what they should and shouldn't be doing, because employees are very nervous right now and they're very curious. They're looking for answers, they're looking for information, and they've got free time on their hands, and they're not there's no one looking over their shoulder to make sure they're not clicking on things they shouldn't click on. So the training is even more important than the work from home scenario that we're dealing with right now. You also want to regularly reassess that breach plan, as I said before, to make sure that it's current, to make sure that you've got people in there that are still the right people, and to update it to deal with new contingencies. Many companies' breach response plans didn't contemplate at all a scenario where all their employees were working from home. So many of them are going to have to update their plans to accommodate that that aspect, because many of the things that probably the typical response to a data breach in a big company, in a big where there's a large breach, is you get everyone together in one room and you set up a war room and you work on your response and you work through the problem there together. Obviously, we can't do that in this environment. So you need to make sure your plan deals with the contingencies that have arisen, and you have to adapt it over time. Now, what resources are available? And I've got more. You're going to get these slides, and I'm not going to take you through all the details, but here's a great source, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. It's only 2 years old now. It's part of the Canadian Security Establishment, part of the federal government. It deals with coordinating federal responses to cyber breaches, but it also does a lot of public education for individuals and for companies. It's a great resource for making sure that you're secure. And they've set out what they call the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations. And I'm not going to take you through the details of all this, but this is a great sort of introduction to what are the basic things you should be doing to make sure your company is secure. So if you're running a small or medium organization, I highly recommend that you look at these controls. I've given you the link there in the footnote. And something to bear in mind is that now that this information is publicly available and free to any company, you should expect that the courts down the road are going to, when they're trying to figure out, did a company behave reasonably? Did they have reasonable protections in place? One of the things I think courts are going to look to is, were they following these guidelines? Because they're controls and guidelines from the government, and again, they're free and widely available. So the government's going to expect that companies were trying to follow these. So check those out. And these are just some of the details. I won't take you through them now to give you a sense of the topics that they cover. Another great place to go for not just information, but assistance is the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange. Again, a relatively new organization. And a threat exchange is an organization that, that has member companies and also governments. And those companies and governments share cyber threat information. So at the sort of the digital level, if a company's been hacked, they share the raw data with the exchange. It's all confidential, but what that allows is for organizations to share threat information and keep each other up to date on new and emerging threats. It started off as a collaboration of the big financial institutions and the big telecom companies, but they've since extended membership, and now there are many small and medium-sized organizations. And if you join this, you have access to information that normally you would only really big corporations would have, and there's a real opportunity to sort of collaborate and work together in fighting these threats and anticipating and planning for them. And again, this is the kind of thing that courts are going to expect your business to have done, because the membership is reasonably priced for small and medium businesses. Courts in the States are starting to expect that companies will belong to an exchange like this so that they're in a better position to plan for threats. I was asked about certification programs, and there are a couple of great ones out there that are available and perfect for, again, small and medium-sized organizations in particular. One is Cybersecurity Canada, and that's provided by the federal government. I've given you the link there to it, and it's a certification program that allows you to, as your company works through it, you can get certified on the basis, again, of those baseline controls that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity sets out. So that's one program. Another is called CyberNB's Cyber Essentials Canada. Now, it's based out of New Brunswick, but it's a national certification program. It doesn't matter where your company is based in Canada. And it provides an excellent certification accreditation program as well. So I would check those out. They are far more cost effective than going through some of the international standards, and they're also well suited to organizations in that small and medium-sized bracket. I was asked also to comment about insurance. Now, there's different kinds of insurance, right? There's your general commercial policies, there's your professional liability policies, but there's also separate either policies or riders for cyber coverage in particular. And these are the kinds of losses that you can insure against. They break down into two categories. One are called first-party losses, and that means your company's own losses if your company is breached. And then there's third-party losses, which means losses that are occasioned by other people as a result of your company being breached. And these are people that might be looking to sue you. And so your insurance covers you against those kinds of losses. So these are the kinds of things you can get coverage for. There's the cost of your data response, and that can be very expensive. A Canadian university a few years back was hit by a ransomware attack. They paid, I think, $26,000 to pay the ransom, and they got the keys to unencrypt their data. So that was the cost to the hackers. But the cost of fixing the data, fixing all the problems caused by the ransomware attack, was more than $1 million. So it costs your data, and that's money spent on lawyers, forensics experts, and equipment. So that's your data response cost. It also costs, related to that are your crisis management costs. What are the costs for you to, like over the period of weeks or months, fix the problem? Lost income in case your business was shut down for some time because of the attack. Online defamation, the cost of regulatory defense in case you end up in a proceeding before a privacy commissioner as a result of all this, or fines that are levied, and also for cyber extortion. For third-party losses, it covers can cover for losses that your business's clients or customers suffered, claims for invasion of privacy in case their data was leaked, and losses that they suffer due to an inability to access systems because of your companies being compromised. And these are some of the other areas that cyber policies in general cover. A word of caution, if you get cyber insurance, and I highly recommend you do, make sure that the people who are responsible for coordinating a response to a data breach incident, whether that's your Chief Information Security Officer or your IT department, whoever it is, are aware of what the policy says. I had a situation last year where a credit union had cyber insurance, and then they had different people who were not responsible for getting that insurance in charge of the breach response. Those people didn't know that the insurance existed, and they didn't know that the insurance policy said specifically that they were required to use a particular cybersecurity vendor in dealing with the data breach. And if they didn't, they voided their insurance. And that may well be what happens in that case now, is that because they used the wrong people, because they didn't know what the policy said, they're offside their coverage. So be very careful that, make sure that whoever is involved in your breach response knows what the policy says and knows where they can get a copy of it. Here's how my firm can help you. We're a global firm. We have offices in Canada, Russia, UK, Singapore, China, and Dubai. We have a cybersecurity team with mature practices in Europe. And we offer a front-to-back offering that includes front-end regulatory advice and compliance advice, breach coaching in the event that you do suffer a cyber incident, post-breach regulatory advice and assistance, helping you go through that process of plugging the holes and dealing with your compliance obligations. And also, in the event you end up in a proceeding with the Privacy Commissioner or a lawsuit, we can be there to defend you. So that's what my firm has to offer in this space. And here are some examples of recent cases. I won't go through them because our time is a bit short, but we've seen the full gamut of things. I can tell you anecdotally, ransomware has been showing up in my practice as the biggest threat of the last couple of years, and I think that that's borne out by most of the studies that you'll see by cybersecurity vendors as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, Brent, thank you for information. I do not see questions to you in Q&A, but I have a few questions from my side.
Great.
And first one, what is the best option for SMB companies who do not have a security manager? What do you recommend?
If you don't have, so let's back up a second. A really big company, there's an expectation, particularly if you're having to comply with European privacy obligations, that you have somebody designated to deal with privacy concerns, that you have someone responsible for data security. That's difficult if you're running a small operation that perhaps has like a website that sells some products. So, and the law recognizes that we're not expecting a small company to implement the full gamut of protections that you would expect, let's say, a telecommunications company to have, but you still have to do something. If your own department isn't set up to manage security itself, I would say use a managed services provider. You can outsource that. There are excellent services that companies that can provide that sort of IT security support, and just take it off of the hands of your own people. What people often fail to understand is that information technology and cybersecurity are very different. They're both technical disciplines, but a person who is an expert in IT is in no way an expert in cybersecurity. And a person who's focused on the technical aspects of cybersecurity isn't the person you want setting up your routers and all that. They're two different disciplines, and it's not a good idea to rely on your own IT department to handle both. It's just too much for a small IT department to have. There are also companies that have, and you talked about somebody at the management level, if you don't have your own chief information security officer or chief information officer, there are companies that also can sort of give you an outsourced option for that. They can sort of give you what we would call virtual, not in-house counsel, but virtual people functioning in that role who you can consult on an as-needed basis. They're not full-time employees, and they can make sure that you have the support you need on that front.
Okay, thank you. So is it possible to use outsourced security manager from the site?
Sorry, say that again? Possible to use an outsourced security manager?
Is it possible to use outsourced security manager?
Yeah, no, absolutely you can do that. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that what I would say you need to make very careful of is that you're working closely with that person. They understand your business and they understand your organization, and that they are working closely with your IT staff, because much as they are the ones in charge of your cybersecurity protection and response, if they actually have to deal with the breach, they're going to have to work very closely and very quickly with your management team and with your information and with your own information technology people to implement solutions at the ground level to stop the attacks and to do the remediation. So it's absolutely fine to outsource for those things, but make sure that you've got that close contact and that they understand who they need to be working with and they understand how your business works.
I see, thank you. And my second question is how to assess the amount of exposure. For example, how much personal data was breached?
Right. That's really difficult now. And I can tell you that we have the law in Canada that governs most of the country, and there are similar provincial laws that deal with the regulatory cost of that, so the fines for a data breach. We haven't seen a whole lot of breaches, a whole lot of fines levied yet, because it's relatively new. We're starting to see the first wave of these over the last couple of years, and there are very big awards against very big companies. It depends on, and the fines are on a per record basis. So it depends how many people were affected and how much information was affected. Now, I can tell you that the cost of those things, compared to certain other kinds of losses and things that you can get damages for at law, are relatively small. A breach where somebody's information is compromised, but nobody does anything with that information and the person doesn't suffer any losses, the costs are not on a per person per record basis that high. But if you're a big organization and and tens of thousands or millions of people were affected, that adds up very quickly. So it can get very big. So it depends on the size of the breach, and it depends on the severity of the breach, because you have fines for the fact that it didn't happen, and the fact that perhaps you didn't report it and you should have. And people can sue in courts for loss of their privacy because as a result of these things. But the amounts that they are offering, that the courts are awarding for a breach where there's no real consequence and no real loss, are relatively small. And we have what's called in Ontario a tort of intrusion upon seclusion, which means you can sue in a situation where somebody was accessing your private information. But if they didn't do anything with it, the damages from a court case like that would be anywhere from $0 to $20,000 at the most, which is a small claims lawsuit in Ontario. It's not worth that much. Now, the amount can get a lot higher. Your potential exposure is much higher if somebody actually finds a way to use that data. So, for instance, credit card data gets out and people's bank accounts, people's credit cards get run up, or people's bank accounts get emptied out. That's where the damages start to get quite serious. But that happens relatively rarely. The more common scenario we see is that people's information is compromised in some way, but nothing really happens to them. So as with most answers, a lawyer will give you the answer is depends, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. So it's something you do want to get advice on, and relatively early on in the process, if you find yourself compromised, because there's reporting obligations, there are fines if you don't report and it turns out you should have, and the privacy commissioners expect you to let them know relatively soon after a breach. In Europe, it's 72 hours. There isn't a set deadline in Canada, but it's days and not weeks.
I see. Does your company can help with this assessment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of thing where, and it is a legal analysis largely. So, yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to talk about that, they can reach out to me. My contact information is on the slide deck, and we'd talk about what's the nature of the information you're holding, how many people's information are you holding, that sort of a thing. And there's the assessment depends on sort of, all right, well, what exactly ends up happening. So you have to walk through a bunch of different scenarios to get a sense of what the span of your potential exposure is.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this information. I hope we will see you soon. And I see that I have questions for me. What does Terling do generally, and how the cybersecurity is implemented from practical point of view within the company? Well, Terling has about 12 business direction. Security is one of them. We usually help companies to provide audit of the IT and security. And also we help to build information security strategy, understand what systems company needs, and probably propose to use security operational center subscription for customers who do not have their own security manager, or they have, for example, only one. because security is quite a wide area, and it's quite hard for SMB, especially companies, to cover all these sectors in information security. We usually give the view on all sectors, on pain points, and help to cover these problem sectors. Hope I answered this question. Thank you all again that join us today. All our contacts will be later sent to you. This webinar also was recorded, and you can see it later, for example, or share the link with your colleagues and employees. Thank you again, and pass the word to Vera.
I just would like to thank all the attendees who attended today's event. I hope you enjoyed the content, and once again, so all the information would be available. Please reach out to us with any questions or suggestions, as well as all our contact information is available on CERBA website. So thank you once again. Have a great day, and please stay safe.